From Transport Topics in Washington, D.C., this is RoadSigns. Here is your host, Seth Clevenger.
Thank you for listening to RoadSigns, the podcast series from Transport Topics that explores the trends and technologies that are shaping the future of trucking. In this episode, we're going to review the trucks, the technologies, and the industry dialogue from the 2025 Advanced Clean Transportation Expo held in late April at the Anaheim Convention Center. Expo is a major venue for truck makers, industry suppliers, and startups to showcase clean transportation technologies, from battery electric trucks and hydrogen fuel cell technology to alternative fuels such as renewable diesel and renewable natural gas. But what did these exhibits and presentations tell us about the future of trucking equipment and the industry's journey to decarbonization? We'll set out to answer that question in this episode. Now, to help me break down the industry news from ACT Expo, I'm happy to bring in two of my colleagues at Transport Topics, features editor Michael Fries and staff reporter Kieran Greenhalgh. Welcome to the podcast, gentlemen.
Oh, glad to be here. Glad to be here, Seth. Thanks for having us.
Lovely to be with you, Seth.
So all three of us made the journey to Anaheim for this year's ACT Expo, and now that we've had a little bit of time to digest everything that we saw, I'd like to just start here by reviewing our top takeaways. So Kieran, would you like to lead us off here? What were the top news developments that you covered at the show?
We saw a lot of battery electric truck announcements from legacy OEMs, including new Class 8 on-highway tractors from Peterbilt to Kenworth and International. Perhaps the biggest of all was from Mack, which teased a day cab or short sleeper configuration of its new on-highway flagship, the Pioneer. What I found most interesting came from a one-on-one with Winrow's CEO Wen Han, who told me about the 3-year-old truck maker's assembly plans. He was also extremely pragmatic about the impact of what he referred to as the dirty word of the moment, tariffs.
"125 years isn't just a number, it's a testament to resilience, innovation, and dedication. Since 1900, Great Dane has been a trusted name in freight transportation, empowering fleets with cutting-edge solutions that keep America moving. From advanced trailers and truck bodies to industry-leading parts and service, Great Dane delivers safety, efficiency, and reliability with every mile. With a proud history behind us and a focus on the road ahead, we're driving the future of freight transportation. Discover how Great Dane can support your business with strength and innovation at greatdane.com. Yeah, so a lot of action in terms of battery electric technologies continue to evolve, seeing new truck models. Michael, what would you add to that based on the time you spent at the show?
Well, just to add on Karen's point about the tariffs, that dirty word. I think in as a whole, the conference goers as well as the speakers, just as the Cummins keynote that we'll probably lean into a little bit further into this program, and also with Tesla, it's just their recognition of the environment that we're in. Speaking of those tariffs, it's that uncertainty. But despite the uncertainty, the industry as a whole brought a very positive tone when it comes to the development of alternative fuels and battery electric vehicles. So, there's still some optimism, but there is a realism of that we have these challenges ahead with tariffs and emissions regulation puzzle that we're all trying to solve right now. From years past, it's the promise of the benefits of alternative fuels and battery electric. Well, this year, it's the real challenges that we are facing in this. And it's just a realization of that, the posturing of the industry to get into a good formation to battle all of this.
Certainly a lot of uncertainty around tariffs and international freight patterns, depending on how it all plays out. But another huge change and another huge source of uncertainty is the regulations, right? The regulatory environment for commercial vehicle emissions have really shifted dramatically during the past year since we last attended ACT Expo. And that, of course, was a major theme at the show. The second Trump administration is reevaluating federal emissions regulations, as well as funding for clean transportation projects. At the same time, California's Air Resources Board earlier this year dropped its Advanced Clean Fleets rule, which would have required fleet operators of size and depending on category to adopt an increasing percentage of zero-emission trucks over time. Now, CARB's Advanced Clean Trucks rule for manufacturers is still in the books, but the House recently passed a bill that would revoke the waiver allowing California and other states to enforce that rule if it's passed by the Senate and signed into law. The upshot is that regulations likely aren't going to drive the trucking industry toward a zero-emission technology future as quickly as it looked a year ago. A lot is in flux. There's a lot of uncertainty, so we just don't know. That was one of the key words coming out of the show, is just a uncertain environment for, certainly for emissions as well. Kieran, I know you closely follow the emissions landscape for commercial trucks. How did you see that playing out at Expo this year?
Revoking the waivers is certainly on the cards, and changes to the GHG3 rule are likely. I spoke with congressional staffers and EPA last week, and they're not clear on the timeline for this. So what I heard, as I'm sure you and Mike did, is that uncertainty is the dominant theme. It's that other dirty word, uncertainty. And it's hurting retail tractor sales and orders as carriers keep their checkbooks under lock and key. There is a timeline that's been delayed from expectations, but we're also perhaps seeing an advance of the timeline for, natural gas vehicles. Perhaps with Freightliner making a big announcement on the Cummins X15N last week at ACT.
For the past couple of years at ACT Expo, zero-emission trucks dominated the expo hall. Even a year ago, there was a sense of urgency to deploy electric vehicles, especially in California, because of the regulations. It sure looked like the industry is going to have to just figure this out. This year, however, there was more of an all-of-the-above approach because of the shift in the regulatory landscape. Certainly noticed a bunch of natural gas-powered trucks on display this year, many equipped with that new Cummins X15 15-liter natural gas engine that's on the market now and making its way into different truck makes. Renewable fuels were big, especially renewable natural gas, along with renewable diesel and biodiesel. All these options are really back on the menu, so to speak, given that shift in regulations. The chair and CEO of Cummins, Jennifer Rumsey, you mentioned her keynote. She really touched on this during her remarks. Could you share your takeaways from her comments, first day of ACT Expo, as well as this broadening menu of power options that we saw in the Expo Hall this year?
Oh, most definitely. With Jennifer Rumsey's speech, it was just kind of a pep talk of sorts for those championing low emissions and the future of fuel, be it alternative or electric. One of the things she brought up was the resiliency of the industry, reminding the folks in the audience that we've been through some tough situations before, namely, most recently, the COVID-19 the pandemic, and also the supply chain issues that we have, which are becoming somewhat of a seesaw at this current moment. One of the things she pointed out, aside from the pep talk that we're going to get through this, is that she laid out a roadmap to success based on three things: the continuing innovation improvements on the greenhouse gas emission side, improving fuel economy, and also, the consideration of full life cycle emissions with fuel and other power sources. That's one thing I've talked about plenty with Brian Antonellis from Fleet Advantage. Is definitely a big part of it. Deciding on the right regulations. And in this current environment right now, that's big question marks. Nailing those three areas in which the industry has to improve, actually executing on those strategies remains to be seen and a space to be watched for sure. Ramsey gave that pep talk to make sure that the industry is on its commitment to have a greener world despite these current situations that are going on right now.
Yeah, well, I think that was a great overview. And, I think the way she put it was for emission regulations that are clear and challenging, but achievable. Your point on full emissions life cycle for a technology is well taken. If you're only looking at tailpipe emissions, you're only looking at part of the equation. Mining of materials, production. If you're running on electricity, how are you generating that electricity? If it's electricity from a coal-fired power plant, then what have you really accomplished, right? So
right.
It makes a lot of sense to have a closer evaluation of how you're sourcing your power as well and that total life cycle. We'll see if that makes its way to the regulators or if that's something that we'll just continue to talk about in the industry. Another topic I wanted to bring up is the State of Sustainable Fleets Market Brief. So this is a report organized every year by TRC, ACT Expo's organizer, and they release that at the show every year. There's a lot of valuable information in the report, but the headline this year, at least in my view, was this clean fleet industry entering a period of peak uncertainty, right? We've already been talking about this a good bit, but that's been driven largely by the shift in emission regulations, still very much in flux. We don't know what these regulations are going to look like when this process is done. Also, a lot of questions about federal funding for zero emission truck deployments and hydrogen hubs. Some projects were funded under the Biden administration. Now we have a question mark about to what extent they'll be funded moving forward. Kieran, how is that uncertainty affecting investments in low and zero emission technology as far as you've seen? Yeah.
I mean, be that among carriers worried about the economic prospects at a time when the federal decision-making process can be politely described as mercurial. But you've got infrastructure builders who, you've referred to this already. They've seen grants, subsidies, or tax incentives vanish. The Jigar Shah-led loan program office has been dismantled. And today, Chris Wright, the Secretary of Energy, said, no, we're not having any of these loans that have been approved. These are things that companies, just like truck manufacturers, spend years. Truck manufacturers spend years planning upgrades to engines and after treatment systems. It's no different for if you're going to build a power plant or you're going to build the new big hydrogen hubs meant to bring billions in investment and thousands of jobs, at least in terms of construction. Companies need to have a degree of certainty before they commit tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars to a project or a series of projects. Look at flatbed carriers, for instance. All the steel, aluminum, and concrete has been affected not only by the Section 232 tariffs, but also by this regression. I'll call it a regression in terms of investment in infrastructure. The price of building a bridge, which is a big issue and has been for many years for the trucking industry, it's just gone up. For the masses of rebar that's put into a project like that. But at the same time, you've got truck makers who are saying, well, I'm just going to wait and see how this happens. Uncertainty hovering over the industry and the economy.
A lot of business decisions are being put on hold until there's more clarity on multiple fronts. "125 years isn't just a number, it's a testament to resilience, innovation, and dedication. Since 1900, Great Dane has been a trusted name in freight transportation, empowering fleets with cutting-edge solutions that keep America moving. From advanced trailers and truck bodies to industry-leading parts and service, Great Dane delivers safety, efficiency, and reliability with every mile. With a proud history behind us and a focus on the road ahead, we're driving the future of freight transportation. Discover how Great Dane can support your business with strength and innovation at greatdane.com. So we talked about how alternative fuels, cleaner burning fuels for the traditional internal combustion engine really did stand out at the show, especially compared to the past couple years. That being said, we still saw some pretty interesting developments in zero emission trucks as well at Expo again this year. And that includes new battery electric Class 8 models that debuted at the show. Kieran, you gave us an overview there, but maybe just speak a little bit about how battery electric technology in the trucking industry has been evolving, how we're already seeing some progress and some evolution in recent years.
Well, we're seeing a focus on aerodynamics, I think, is a key term. We've got the much ballyhooed Tesla Semi, the Winrose, same concept with the central driver, seat position, and the aerodynamic shape. But even your legacy players in the market, Mack and Volvo are both going to bring out new sleeper trucks that are battery electric, and they're based on these new long haul redesigned centerpieces of their range. I think Michael covered the launch of the Mack Pioneer last month, and I covered the launch of the Volvo VNL. These are much more aerodynamic trucks.
We're seeing continued growth, more models, more options, and subsequent generations and iterations of these battery electric trucks. I think that technology will only improve, and the early adopters will continue to learn. We'll also see further investment in infrastructure as that build out continues. That's been probably the weakest point of the battery electric rollout, the slow development of infrastructure to support it. But as progress is made, the companies bring more terminal charging online and also public charging becoming more available. We'll see further development on that front. Kieran, you mentioned Tesla. Michael, I know you covered Tesla's update on the Tesla Semi during the show. It's been kind of a long wait for that vehicle.
We learned that Tesla is moving slowly but surely toward full-scale production of the Semi. By Dan Priestley, the senior manager of semis for Tesla, he said during ACT Expo that full-scale production will go on in 2026. It was a different presentation than what he had last year. Even fleets that were starting to consider these, now is the time to scale. Now is the time to go big when it comes to EVs, he said last year, 2024. One thing that he did joke about during that time, which I thought was kind of interesting, even to where we're standing right now, is when he was talking about the timing. You alluded to it as well, Seth, the Semi being introduced in 2017. He said last year, I know there have been questions on timing, but Tesla has a specialty in turning the impossible into merely late. And that sort of vibe kind of continued this year as well. Presley did tell the crowd that we're going to have full scale production of those semis in 2016. He also talked a lot about the charging network. One of the things he announced was a major public investment in a dedicated publicly available charging network for semi trucks with 46 sites across the country, already in progress. And it represents more than about 300 megawatt capable charging posts. So that's going to be a supportive effort between the private charging solutions and the public investment involved as well. And he really boosted the experience of the charging ports, where he was boasting of 99.95% reliability rates. So he was that big announcement when it came to the Semi, because last year he was just toting that the fleet of semis back in 2024 were traveling more than 3.5 million miles. This year they're accumulating around 7.9 million miles, and 26 of those vehicles are already exceeding 100,000 miles in real world operations. And just the small minor improvements as well, including a new mirror, drop glass, and other driver focused enhancements, which just sort of goes along with a more efficient high voltage battery. It's really those particular little things. And he wrapped up his presentation. There was a sales pitch to the crowd as well, because it's always nice to have a few more Teslas out on the road. So it was basically just those improvements and just, we're doing well, please buy our truck. It kind of came down to that.
Well, certainly the infrastructure investment, the build out of a charging network to support the vehicle, certainly something important to watch. I think that Tesla's success in the battery electric passenger car market, you could attribute a lot of that to the charging network they established. And imagine that if you're going to succeed in Class 8 trucking, that will be a similar roadmap. It is good to see and interesting to see a lot of this finally come to fruition. I was there during the unveiling back in late 2017, so it has been a long wait. And I think that some of those companies that got early pre-orders have been clearly waiting for a very long time, but the factory is being built now, and we'll see this play out more in the real world soon. Another takeaway here is that the pace of adoption and the mix of technologies may shift here based on the regulatory changes. Even with likely regulatory rollbacks, uncertainty around tariffs, maybe it's a change in the types of technologies that get rolled out first or in greater volume. But given the attendance at this show, more than 200 commercial vehicles on display, still seems and feels clear that the transportation industry continues on this path toward a more sustainable future, maybe just in a slightly different way than we might have imagined a year or two ago. Gentlemen, do you agree with that assessment? Kieran, I'll let you weigh in first. That overall push toward a lower carbon, cleaner transportation industry. You still see progress on the horizon?
Yeah, the pace is set to slow, particularly on hydrogen. We've covered the demise of Hyzon and Nikola since the start of the year. We've heard from the two PACCAR units about their promise of serial production this year. That's no longer going to be the case. But at the same time, renewable natural gas prospects are perking up. I spoke to some very excited executives in that segment of the sustainable transportation space last week. Their excitement about the biggest truck manufacturer in America becoming an option for them.
Yeah, for sure. And, Mike, you share the assessment overall? Trucking continues to move toward a more sustainable future.
Well, I believe so. One of the things that I caught at the show last week was that the industry as a whole is figuring out that, this future of is a little different than what we planned, being that we have these alternative sources that, in some cases we have the infrastructure for, we should be making plans to incorporate that as a more viable lane versus electric. Not to say that electric's never coming. It is coming. The sources of hydrogen and natural gas, for example, are becoming much more viable for fleets. And the critical understanding of how those sources are going to be beneficial to their fleet from an efficiency standpoint, I think is ringing clearer by the year. Depending on who you ask, Cummins with their project or suppliers of hydrogen, they will say this is the future. The future is coming now when it comes to natural gas and Cummins standpoint, or someone from a hydrogen provider who sees that as the next big thing, the next viable choice for fleets. So I think it's just been an understanding of that. These fleets, these providers are seeing a way forward to providing some point of sustainability and also a sales pitch and a message to those fleets. The industry can get moving with these alternative sources, with the benefit that they have been, advertising for all these years.
Yeah, for sure. ACT Expo is traditionally focused on clean transportation, low and zero emission technologies. That being said, I felt there was a broadening of the scope a little bit this year. There was a good deal of dialogue and exhibits focused on software, artificial intelligence, and autonomous driving. So really technology that's vehicle focused. You see several autonomous driving technology developers at the show. One of them, Plus, highlighted how it's integrating its technology with Hyundai's hydrogen fuel cell trucks. So sometimes those two trends converge at a show like this. Of course, as the show was winding down, Aurora announced that it had begun commercial autonomous truck operations in Texas without a safety driver behind the wheel for the first time. So that's a milestone for the development and deployment of autonomous trucks in the industry. I'd like to ask each of you if you see topics like software-defined vehicles, AI, and autonomous driving technology becoming a bigger part of a conversation moving forward at a show like ACT Expo.
Kieran, you can take this one.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, software-defined vehicles, they can't help but be a part of this conversation. The world's two largest truck makers, Daimler and Volvo, are teaming up. Various executives have said, who would have ever thought that would happen? Autonomous trucks too. Daimler has its own autonomous division, Torque Robotics. If Daimler's involved in these two things, it posts some very, very big signposts and guideposts.
Yeah, for sure. Not only are Volvo and Daimler working together on software-defined vehicles, they're also working together on hydrogen fuel cell with their cell-centric venture, which is also at ACT Expo.
And they're working together on charging in Europe with Milans.
Yeah, I just want to say, I think right now, as we're currently moving, the future is going to be a little more AI than autonomous. I think short term, midterm, probably. With AI, we will have more of an influence on the fleet maintenance side with preventive maintenance and the tracking that's going on and the recommended avenues of repair and maintenance. I think AI was going to be a very big player in that. And I think we're going to see more of an impact on that side, especially when you get into telematics a bit. You get into the base shops where AI is probably going to be leaned on a little more heavily than autonomous than what's happening now on the broader scope. But I think in these next 3 to 5 years, we're going to make a lot of progress on the AI side of things. Not to say that autonomous is not going to move at a fast pace, but I think right now in the next few years, AI is going to have a much more of an impact, especially on the maintenance side.
Maintenance and also fleet management, everything from efficiency of your operations, back office workflows, routing. And a lot of this ties into sustainability as well, right? I mean, if you're matching your trucks and your loads more efficiently, if you're planning your routes more efficiently through the use of AI, you're operating more efficiently. The most efficient mile you can run is the mile that you don't run. And if you can eliminate deadhead through better planning, through the use of software and machine learning, then that also has a real impact on emissions as well. Before we wrap up here, I'd like to open it up to both of you for any final thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners. We've covered a lot of ground here. If there's anything we didn't get to, now would be the time. Kieran?
Bring on Vegas.
That's right. Act Expo is back to Vegas next year.
By next year, we'll be talking about the Tesla Semi in more detail, assuming production starts on time. Mike's already referred to, Tesla being the world champions at delivering on time. Perhaps we'll have more clarity on the pace of adoption. Volvo and Daimler might have given us more clarity on their hydrogen fuel cell and hydrogen ICE projects, that they've both been very vague and given themselves plenty of leeway and said, hey, end of the decade, but we might have a bit more clarity on that. At the moment, my crystal ball is cloudier than an Anaheim morning this past week.
Perhaps we'll also have more clarity a year from now on what these regulations are going to look like. The reconsideration and reevaluation of federal emissions regulations. And I suspect and hope that by the time we convene in April of 2026, we'll have a much clearer picture of that policy side, but we shall see.
Seth, on the nail with the emissions regulations. I think when we get to 2026 in Las Vegas, we might have a totally different conversation that we're having today, And also, too, one thing that I'm looking forward to next year is the kind of benchmark where, as Karen was noting about the legacy OEM's new product, definitely Tesla as well. It's just to see how far the ball has moved in the progress of alternative fuels and EVs. So I'm really interested, seeing what's going to happen with this administration and this industry in general, because we might get a different picture than what we're thinking of right now.
For sure. So again, we've covered a great deal of ground here. It was a busy show, and I think we provided a really good recap of all that happened out in Anaheim. So I think that's a good stopping point here. Thank you again, Michael and Kieran, for contributing to our coverage of a very busy show and very busy event, and also for joining me here and sharing your insights on this podcast.
Not a problem. Thanks for having us, Seth.
A pleasure as always, Seth.
So we hope you've enjoyed this recap of the commercial vehicle technologies on display at ACT Expo 2025. And as a final reminder, you can check out our coverage of the show online at ttnews.com. And if you're a Transport Topics subscriber, you can review our complete ACT Expo coverage in the May 5th issue of TT. If you're not a subscriber, you can sign up at ttn.ws/TT subscribe or text TT subscribe to 571-622-0001. If you've enjoyed this episode of Road Signs, please let others know. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And of course, we'll be back soon with a fresh episode of Road Signs. Until then, I'm Seth Clevenger. Thank you for listening.